sort of weird. Yeah. And then over here, there's another one. It kind of looks like a little, kind of like an elf ear or something weird like that. Okay. So those are the two atria. Okay. So the way we're going to do our heart dissection is super simple, but it's very important that you place your probes correctly. Okay. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a hole that leads into an atrium and then down into a ventricle. So not any hole, right? You can't be just sticking probes wherever there are any holes, right? It's got to be a hole that leads into an atrium. So I know there's an atrium here, so I'm going to start poking around. And sure enough, hey, there's a hole that goes into the atrium first and then down to a ventricle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my probe and I'm just going to kind of wiggle it path of least resistance until it pops out. Okay? Now, here's my other atrium. So now, once again, I got to find a hole. But I got to find a hole that goes into the atrium. So that hole's not going to work because that doesn't go into the atrium. That doesn't go into the atrium. Oh, that does. Right? So I cannot, I've already said it like 2 times, but I cannot say it enough times. The hole needs to go into the atrium and then down into the ventricle. If you don't do it that way, your heart's going to be a disaster. Okay? So it's got to go into the atrium and then down into the ventricle, and then you just push down until your probe punches through the bottom. Okay? So, still not sure which side is which. Okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut through to the level of my probe, right? And the direction I want to do that in, so do I want to cut on that side? Do I want to cut on that? What side do I want to cut on? I want to go for the middle of my atrium, right? So I can see my atrium is here, so I want to shoot for the middle more or less, right? So you can use scissors to get through the atrium because it's relatively thin. But pretty soon when we get to the ventricle, it's gonna get too thick to use the scissors, right? So see how I just cut through the atrium? Mm-hmm. And now I'm gonna cut right along the length of where my probe is. One thing I wanna do is I wanna sort of stabilize my hand because the hearts are slippery because they have fat on the outside. I don't wanna cut any deeper than my probe. So as I go, I'm gonna kind of keep an eye on my probe. Down, 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 down. Check, make sure I'm not cutting past my probe. Down, 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 down. Make sure I'm not cutting past my probe. Down, 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 down. That blade is bent. That's weird. Right? Got all the way to my probe, so this is one side of the heart. We'll go back to this side in a second. Okay? Let's cut open the other side. Right? So once again, where I want to cut is I want to go through the middle of my atrium. So I don't want to cut on this side. I want to cut, if I lay my atrium down flat, I want to cut through the middle of my atrium. So you might be cutting at what seems like a weird angle, okay? But that's okay. So it's going to kind of be a curve, yeah. Right? So sometimes it's got to be kind of a curve. Yeah, so that's where I'm going to go. So I'm through the middle of my atrium. All right, and then I'm going to, once I get through my atrium, once again, I'm just going to kind of try to go along where my probe is, and I don't want to go deeper than my probe. But I do want to get to my probe. Yeah, so I've cut down to where my probe is.
So wouldn't that be the left side though?
Okay, so which side is this? How do we know? How do we know which side's which?
Thicker.
The thickness, right?
Thickness.
So do you see how thick this wall
That's the
is?
left.
And now look at how thick this one is.
Can we find based on the curves?
The problem is that the curves are all messed up because the heart is squished. So that's why I almost never bother to try to figure it out from the outside. I mean, you can figure it out, but it's confusing because it's all like mangled and mushed. But if you look at the wall and you're like, yeah, that is obviously different from that, right? So it's a giveaway. So that's why I don't even bother doing it the other way, okay? So if this is my left side, clearly, yeah? Because it's got thicker walls. This must be my right side. Okay? So now that we know which side's which, let's start from the beginning, and if you know the path of blood through the heart, you'll know where everything is, okay? So what atrium is this? What side are we on again?
The right side.
Right side. So this chamber right here is the right atrium that we've cut open, Yeah? What are the vessels that lead us into the right atrium? Superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava is pretty much gone. It's the hole that I poked in, right? So the hole that I put my probe in was the superior vena cava. And then usually you can also find, here it is, wait. Right? And then you're looking for another vessel that comes off of the right atrium, and it doesn't go down. You want it to go down because it's called the inferior vena cava. So you want it to point down, but it usually comes off in a sort of transverse direction, sort of horizontally. Yeah? So the probe right now is in the inferior vena cava. And I know it's the inferior vena cava because it's attached to the right atrium. Yeah? Okay. Now, underneath the right atrium, I got this little flap. What's this little flap called? That's the strings. What's the flap? It's one of the valves. Which valve is it? Tricuspid or right atrioventricular valve. Yeah? And then you've got chordae tendineae, your little strings. Yeah? And then you've got these little muscles that look kind of like nipples. There's one, there's another one. What are those? Those are papillary muscles. So what chamber am I in now? Right ventricle, because I'm still on the right side. Yeah? And so now, from here, where are we going to go next? So I'm just following the path where I can go somewhere, which is this way. So what am I going to? After the left ventricle? Where does the right ventricle? Where does the left ventricle? Where does the right ventricle lead?
Oh, to the left, not the trunk. Is it?
Yeah, so the pulmonary trunk.
Yeah.
So this is the pulmonary trunk. Yeah? You guys don't know the pathology of your heart yet. That's why you're so quiet. Okay, you guys need to work on that, right? Because this isn't going to make sense if you don't know that. Yeah? So, pulmonary trunk. Yeah? We passed through the pulmonary valve in there somewhere. The way we've dissected these hearts, you can't see that. You can see it on all the models in the plastinated hearts, though. So there's plenty of opportunities for you to see one. You just can't see it on this. So this is the pulmonary trunk. So then the pulmonary trunk leads to the pulmonary arteries.
The T, the left and right.
Right? And then that goes to the lungs, and then it comes back to the left side of the heart through what? So before the atrium, though, the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are never intact. It's always just a hole, right? So this hole is where the pulmonary veins attached, yeah? And so now I'm inside the left atrium, yeah? And then what's this little flap? Bicuspid or mitral valve or left atrioventricular valve. We've got chordae tendineae and papillary muscles again. And then what chamber am I in here? Left ventricle, and then I'm poking my probe until I find a way out. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, where? Oh, there we go. So what must that be? That must be the aorta.
Yep.
Because it's attached to the left ventricle. Right? So the way I'm going to ask questions about big blood vessels like that on the practical exam is I'll either use a probe or a pipe cleaner or something, and I'll actually like stick it through, right? And I might cut off a little extra piece of the heart so it'll kind of lay open. And I'd say like, what blood vessel is the probe going through? So that you can say, oh, well, it's coming from the left ventricle, so I know it's the aorta. Yeah? So that's how I'll ask that kind of a thing. Okay? And then the only other thing is the interventricular septum. If you stick your finger in both ventricles, a finger and a thumb, what you're squeezing, if you squeeze your finger and your thumb together, is the interventricular septum.
That's it.
Okay?
Bada bing, bada bang.